Hey guys, tonight we are diving into a world where sleep is supposed to be gentle and effortless, but if you lived in the Victorian era, you'd quickly discover that falling asleep was anything but simple. Imagine lying in a dark, chilly London bedroom, the flicker of a gas lamp outside the window, carriages rattling faintly on cobblestones. You toss, you turn, and then you remember you're in the 19th century, a time when doctors thought they knew everything and, honestly, they knew very little. If you came here looking for rest, let me warn you, you might not survive the first night of cures. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and the time right now in the comments, because it's always fun to imagine someone in Sydney nodding off while someone in Toronto is just settling into bed. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by noticing how strangely familiar the Victorian struggle with insomnia feels. It's not just a modern problem, with screens glowing in your face and caffeine coursing through your veins. Back in the 1800s, people were just as restless, staring at the ceiling beams and wondering why sleep wouldn't come. The difference, though, is that their remedies ranged from quirky to outright absurd. One key reason insomnia was such a big deal is because nighttime was very different then, as lighting had extended the hours of activity. But artificial light also made nights unnaturally bright in big cities. People worried that society itself was disrupting natural sleep cycles. Historians still debate whether the Victorians really slept into distinct phases, a first sleep and a second sleep, or whether that's just a theory based on scattered evidence. But the fact remains, sleep was inconsistent, and that inconsistency drove people to experiment. So, let's picture yourself in a Victorian household. You're pacing across creaky wooden floors, wrapped in a heavy nightshirt that's honestly less comfortable than the pajamas you left back in the 21st century. The doctor has probably told you that your nervous system is overstimulated. He uses that phrase a lot, though he can't really explain what it means. Overstimulated nerves was basically a catch-all for anything the Victorians didn't understand an early version of. Have you tried turning it off and back on again? One of the first remedies you'd hear about is simply self-discipline. Doctors told patients that insomnia was often their own fault. Too much reading by candlelight, too many intellectual conversations at night, or, heaven forbid, too much thinking in general. So if you were lying awake, it wasn't because your mattress was lumpy or because you were stressed about work, it was because you were a moral failure at bedtime. Imagine your physician wagging a finger at you and saying, "Stop using your brain after 8 p.m. Not exactly comforting. Of course, not everyone bought into that. Some people took matters into their own hands, creating personal routines to chase away sleeplessness. You might try drinking warm milk, which was one of the few ideas that has survived into modern times. But here's the Victorian twist. Sometimes the milk was spiced with nutmeg, cinnamon, or even a dash of brandy. Yes, because nothing says bedtime peace like milk with alcohol in it. Another very Victorian approach was to lean on religion. Any medical pamphlets suggested prayer as a cure for sleeplessness. The reasoning was that prayer calms the mind, focusing it away from worry. You, lying in bed, might recite psalms softly to yourself, the sound mingling with the tick of a clock in the hallway. Did it work? Well, historians still argue whether religious rituals really reduced insomnia, or whether they just provided a distraction until fatigue finally won. But prayer wasn't enough for everyone. By the mid-19th century, the world was buzzing with new scientific ideas, and people wanted practical solutions. This was the age of medical lectures, self-help manuals, and a booming publishing industry. Imagine you're holding a little green book bought from a corner bookstall, its title promising sure remedies for wakeful nights. Flip through, half hopeful, half suspicious, wondering whether this slim volume actually knows your misery. Inside, you'd find advice that ranges from oddly logical to wildly impractical. One page might say, keep your bedroom well ventilated, avoid spicy dinners, and walk a little before bed. That doesn't sound too crazy, right? But then 2 pages later, it insists you should rub vinegar on your temples, or that you must sleep with your head facing north to align with the Earth's magnetic pole. At that point, you'd close the book, sigh, and mutter, sure, why not? Because when you're desperate for sleep, you'll try almost anything. Here's the thing that really strikes you, though. Insomnia wasn't just about health, it was about status. If you were wealthy, you had the luxury of experimenting with remedies. You could order exotic herbs, attend public lectures on nerve health, or even hire a specialist to advise you. If you were poor, your options were limited. You'd probably just lay awake in a cramped tenement. No remedies except exhaustion itself. Doctors of the time rarely acknowledged this divide. They wrote as if everyone had equal access to rest, when in reality, class determined who could afford to fight insomnia in the first place. And there's one more irony. In Victorian society, sleeplessness was often worn like a badge of honor. Intellectuals boasted about long nights of reading or working late by lamplight. Writers claimed their best ideas came at 2 in the morning, scribbled onto scraps of paper. Insomnia, for them, was a sign of genius. But if you weren't a poet or a scientist, insomnia was simply a problem, and one your doctor probably blamed on your weak nerves. So tonight, as you drift into the story, imagine yourself caught between those extremes, sleeplessness as both a curse and a strange sort of status symbol. You're awake while the city sleeps, your mind racing, your remedies scattered across the nightstand. Do you drink the milk, say the prayers, or just stare at the ceiling and wait? The Victorians didn't know, and honestly, maybe we don't either. You're still awake? Of course you are. The candle stop has burned low. The room smells faintly of wax and dust, and you can hear the floorboards crack as if the house itself is restless with you tonight. Someone suggests a remedy more practical or at least more edible, a warm brew. They say something gentle to coax the body toward rest. And so you find yourself in the kitchen, stirring up what Victorians called bedtime brews. The base is usually milk or hot water, but what goes into it? That's where things get creative, sometimes alarmingly so. One common mixture is warm milk with nutmeg sprinkled on top, as though nutmeg had mystical powers to charm the nerves. Some households swore by chamomile tea, a choice that at least sounds reasonable to modern ears. But then come the more eccentric recipes: onion water, lettuce tea, and in some cases, concoctions thickened with raw egg yolks. Imagine holding a steaming mug, the scent of boiled onion rising into your face, and being told with a straight expression, "Drink up, it will help you sleep." You begin to wonder if staying awake is actually the better option. Doctors of the period wrote entire pamphlets listing these drinks, insisted that the bitterness of lettuce leaves had soothing vapors. Others argued that onions had a mysterious narcotic essence. Historians today still debate whether Victorians truly believed in these chemical properties, or whether it was more of a comforting ritual, something that gave sleepless people the sense that they were actively doing something about their misery. And then there was alcohol. It wasn't uncommon for recipes to include a splash of brandy, sherry, or even gin, a nightcap. In the most literal sense, you take a sip, it warms you. You feel drowsy, but the sleep that follows is shallow and often broken. Modern medicine tells us alcohol is more likely to disrupt rest than promote it, but back then, it was considered a reliable ally. Some guides even recommended hot beer with cinnamon. Imagine cradling that in your hands before bed, comforting to some, stomach turning to others. Occasionally, these brews strayed into territory that feels almost alchemical. A recipe might demand powdered opium mixed into syrup, or laudanum stirred into milk. It's a slippery slope. You're not just drinking tea anymore. You're flirting with narcotics. Yet this wasn't considered unusual. Pharmacists sold such mixtures openly, and no one blinked if you picked up a bottle for bedtime, of course. History books point out that addiction often began with these innocent remedies, and scholars still argue about how much society knew of the risks at the time. Picture yourself holding one of these brews, sitting by the fire in a dim Victorian parlor. The clock ticks outside, the city winds down. You raise the cup, sip the strange liquid, and wait for drowsiness to come. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The point isn't whether the brew worked, it's that you are participating in a whole culture of self-experimentation. Everyone had a recipe. Every family swore theirs was the best, and every insomniac prayed for the one mixture that might finally close their eyes. It's a strangely cozy image, isn't it? You, half asleep, mug in hand, trusting the wisdom of onions and nutmeg. The modern brain is skeptical, but in that moment, you are a Victorian insomniac trying desperately to believe in a cure, and that belief, perhaps more than the ingredients themselves, is what carried people toward slumber. You're dowsing off almost, but then the floor creaks again, the draft sneaks under the door, and your mind perks up just when it shouldn't. The warm brew didn't quite do the trick, so you go back to your doctor, and this time he prescribes something so simple, almost childlike, that you can't help laughing. Count sheep, literally. Now, you've probably heard this as a modern cliché. Close your eyes. Picture a flock of fluffy sheep hopping over a fence. But in the Victorian age, this was printed in medical advice books as a serious remedy. Some guides instruct you to imagine 1,000 sheep in a meadow, each one stepping calmly across a stream. You weren't just supposed to count, you were to imagine them in great detail, their wool, their hooves, even the sound of water trickling by. The logic, if your mind focused on something endlessly repetitive, eventually it would get bored and shut down. Of course, the Victorians loved structure. Some manuals even gave step-by-step rules. Visualize 1 sheep per breath. Keep a steady rhythm. Do not skip numbers. It almost sounds like meditation, doesn't it? Except instead of focusing on your breath, you're imagining a very obedient parade of livestock. You lie there in your stiff Victorian bed, trying to picture this meadow. The doctor tells you to banish all exciting thoughts. You try, but soon your imagination wanders. One of your sheep refuses to jump, another runs off toward the hedgerow, and before you know it, you're herding instead of sleeping. Not exactly restful. Historians still debate whether this was ever effective. Some argue it was just a placebo or mental trick for people who wanted to feel they were doing something. Others suggest that for those unused to mental imagery, concentrating so hard might have actually woken them up more. You can almost hear a Victorian insomniac grumble, "I'm more tired from counting than from staying awake." But here's the charming part. Cheat counting wasn't just a medical suggestion, it became a kind of cultural joke. Satirical magazines poked fun at it. Cartoonists drew patients surrounded by endless flocks in their bedrooms. One diary even mentions a man who claimed he fell asleep dreaming about arguing with his sheep, which, in a strange way, might have worked just as well as counting them. And there's another wrinkle. Not all doctors agreed. Some swore by sheep. Others insisted you should imagine something else entirely, rows of soldiers marching or apples tumbling into a basket. The idea was always the same, a slow, rhythmic, endless procession. Modern scholars debate whether this was an early form of guided imagery, a psychological technique long before psychology was even considered a science. So there you are, lying in the dark, your breath matching the rhythm of an invisible flock. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. By the time you reach 500, you don't know whether you're drowsy or just annoyed. But in that frustration lies a very human truth. Sometimes, even the simplest, silliest remedies carry just enough hope to keep you trying. And isn't that what most insomnia cures are about? Not science, not certainty, but the fragile faith that maybe, tonight, something will finally work. The sheep, alas, have failed you. They hop endlessly in your imagination, and you remain wide awake. So, Someone suggests a cure that is far more tangible and perhaps more uncomfortable: heat. In the Victorian era, it was a common belief that warmth could lull the body into slumber, but since central heating wasn't quite a thing for most homes, people got creative, sometimes a little too creative. You shuffle into bed with what looks suspiciously like dinner: a baked potato. Yes, you heard that correctly. Victorians were known to wrap hot bricks or freshly roasted potatoes in cloth and tuck them under the sheets. The logic was simple: warmth relaxes the muscles, so sleep should follow. And to be fair, it's not entirely nonsense. The modern electric heating pad is basically the same idea, minus the carbs. Imagine yourself pulling the covers over your shoulders, a steaming potato at your feet. The room is drafty, the wind rattles the window, and the potato radiates a soft, fleeting heat. For a brief moment, it actually feels nice, but then the potato cools, turning from comfort to clammy lump. You shift your toes and wonder how on earth this is supposed to help. Some households preferred hot bricks heated in the fire. These were wrapped in flannel or old rags and slipped into bed as makeshift warmers. Effective, sometimes; pleasant, not always. If the wrapping was too thin, you risked burns. If too thick, the warmth faded almost instantly. A delicate balance, and not exactly the kind of thing that promotes relaxation. Historians note that this practice wasn't just about sleep, it was also about thrift. A hot potato could warm your bed and become part of tomorrow's meal. No waste, just dual-purpose comfort. Scholars debate whether Victorians truly believed in the sleep-inducing properties of this heat, or if it was simply a matter of surviving cold nights and hoping drowsiness followed. Some doctors took the idea even further. Medical guides suggested warming the abdomen specifically, arguing that digestion and sleep were linked. You picture a family carefully placing heated bricks on their bellies, eyes closed, convinced they'd wake refreshed. Others believed that the heat should be applied to the feet, because restless feet cause a restless brain. You wiggle your toes under the covers and can almost hear that reasoning. And then there was the ritual of baked pans, not the kind you're thinking of, but metal pans filled with hot coals, lit between sheets before bedtime. The danger, of course, was obvious. More than one Victorian diary contains anxious notes about scorched linens or singed mattresses. Nothing like the faint smell of smoke to make you more alert than ever. So there you are, lying in bed with roasted potatoes, warm bricks, and the faint paranoia of fire. Did it work? Sometimes, probably. Was it foolproof? Absolutely not. But it reveals something very telling about the Victorian approach to sleep. Comfort and cure were hopelessly tangled together. If the method distracted you from your restless mind, even for a little while, then it was good enough. And maybe that's the hidden charm. You close your eyes, toes pressed against a slowly cooling potato, and smile at the sheer absurdity of it. Perhaps laughter, more than heat, was the true sedative all along. The warmth fades, the potato has gone cold, the brick has lost its glow, and you're left wide-eyed once again. At this point, A kindly neighbor leans in with advice that sounds more like gardening than medicine. Breathe lavender. Yes, Victorians adored their scented remedies, and lavender was one of the reigning champions of bedtime cures. Picture yourself in a dim Victorian bedroom, curtains drawn, a little muslin pouch of dried lavender tucked under your pillow. The scent rises as you shift, floral and faintly dusty, and you're told this will calm the nerves and hush the mind. Was it effective? A B. Modern science admits lavender does have mild relaxing properties, but whether it can conquer full-blown insomnia, still a matter of debate. But lavender wasn't alone. Doctors recommended roses, violets, even freshly cut hay. The theory was that sweet smells lulled the body into rest, while pungent odors, like vinegar or camphor, were reserved for clearing the head. Households sprinkled lavender water on bed linens, others burned incense, and some even stuffed entire mattresses with aromatic herbs. You imagine lying on a bed that smells more like an apothecary than a bedroom, wondering whether you're about to fall asleep or sneeze. The Victorians also took their scent seriously in terms of atmosphere. They believed foul air or miasma cold disturbed sleep just as much as it could cause illness. A bedroom with sweet smells wasn't just pleasant, it was protective. Scholars still debate whether this was about actual medicinal effect or just reassurance against invisible dangers. And then there was valerian root, Valerian, sometimes called nature's valium, though in practice it often smelled more like sweaty socks. Victorians brewed it into teas, ground it into powders, and inhaled its essence. You hold the cup to your lips, the odor hitting your nose with a pungent punch, and you wonder how anyone could find this soothing. Yet medical texts swore by it, insisting it calmed the nervous system. Perfumed sleep masks also became fashionable. Imagine tying a soft cloth over your eyes, lined with herbs, while trying to ignore the fact that you look like a costumed actor waiting backstage. You lie there in the dark, the smell of lavender and valerian competing for dominance, hoping that the battle of aromas will distract your brain into shutting down. Some remedies even crossed into superstition. People believed placing sprigs of rosemary or thyme under the pillow might ward off nightmares, letting you slip into deeper rest. Was this medicine or magic? Historians still argue the line was blurry, and perhaps deliberately so. After all, when you're desperate for sleep, what difference does it make whether it's science or spellcraft, as long as it works? So there you are, nestled in a cloud of Victorian fragrance, your pillow stuffed with herbs, your sheets misted with lavender water. It's soothing, yes, but also a little ridiculous. You can almost hear your modern self whispering, you're basically a sachet in human form. Still, in the hush of that perfumed bedroom, you realize that even if the cure doesn't send you to sleep, at least it makes the long night feel a little gentler. You've tried the perfumes, the sachets, even the sweaty sock tea of valerian root, and still the ceiling beams stare back at you. So someone offers a cure that sounds deceptively modern. Exercise before bed, not the kind you're picturing with yoga mats and stretching videos. but Victorian-style calisthenics often prescribed as a serious medical treatment for restless nights. Imagine it's midnight, and instead of curling under the covers, you're instructed to get out of bed and stimulate the circulation. That might mean walking briskly around your room, swinging your arms like a metronome, or even climbing a flight of stairs several times. Some manuals suggested jumping in place. Yes, insomnia in the Victorian era sometimes meant doing an impromptu workout at the worst possible hour. The theory behind this was surprisingly straightforward. Wear out the body and the mind will follow. A tired frame, they believed, couldn't resist the pull of sleep, and in some cases, perhaps it worked after all. A brisk walk in the evening still helped some people relax today, but other times, you can imagine it only making you more alert. Your pulse quickens, your cheeks flush, and instead of drifting off, you're wide awake and slightly sweaty. One particularly odd recommendation was cold night walks. Doctors advised insomniacs to leave their beds, wrap in a shawl, and wander the garden until fatigue set in. Picture yourself crunching across frosty grass under a Victorian moon. Your slip is already damp, your nose running, and you wonder if this is medicine or just punishment. Of course, the Victorians also paired exercise with elaborate breathing routines. Guides instructed you to inhale deeply, hold, and exhale slowly, sometimes while standing in front of an open window. This, they claimed, filled the lungs with fresh air and reset the nervous system. Historians note that these breathing regimens weren't far off from modern relaxation techniques, though they were often framed with a heavy dose of moral discipline. And here's where it gets stranger. Some doctors recommended patients beat their mattresses or shake their pillows vigorously before lying down. The physical effort supposedly expelled stale air and rejuvenated the bedding. Can almost picture it flailing about with a pillow in hand, accidentally waking the entire household, all in the name of sleep. Scholars still argue about whether these nightly exercises were based on real physiological benefit or just Victorian obsession with discipline and control. Was the goal truly sleep, or was it a moral lesson in earning your rest? The line is hazy, but imagine yourself now, standing in your darkened Victorian room, swinging like a clock pendulum, desk filling with cold night air. It feels absurd, almost theatrical, and yet, maybe just maybe the sheer monotony of it all lulls you back toward the bed. You collapse onto your potato-warmed sheets, your breath slowing, and you think, if nothing else, at least I tried my best bedtime aerobics. You've marched, you've swung your arms, you've even endured the frosty midnight stroll, but still sleep hides from you. The Victorians, never short on creativity, now point you toward the realm of strange diets, because if your body can't sleep, maybe your stomach can bribe it into submission. One of the most common recommendations was a warm glass of milk before bed. Picture yourself in a quiet kitchen, lantern flickering, the milk gently steaming in a tin cup. Doctors swore it soothed the nerves and warmed the stomach. Does it work? Modern science admits there's some comfort in the ritual, Though the supposed sleep-inducing compounds are too mild to knock anyone out quickly, still, there's something undeniably calming about the warmth in your hands. But milk was only the beginning. Some households swore by bowls of bread soaked in warm beer. Yes, beer porridge. You lift the spoon, the yeasty smell rising, and wonder whether you're treating insomnia or just inventing the first questionable pub snack. Others turn to barley water, oat gruel, or thin broths, each thought to calm the stomach and, in turn, calm the mind. And then there were the more unusual pairings. Apples baked with cloves were prescribed as gentle sedatives. Lettuce soup was touted as a natural tranquilizer, thanks to the faintly soporific compounds in lettuce leaves. Imagine sipping a pale green broth, your eyelids heavy not from chemistry but from sheer culinary disappointment. Not all remedies were gentle. Some Victorian doctors suggested avoiding heavy meat suppers. Gaming digestion kept the body to awake. Others recommended bland, starchy foods like rice pudding or tapioca. Basically, the more boring the meal, the quicker the sleep. You realize you're not just fighting insomnia, you're fighting your taste buds. Of course, not everyone agreed. Scholars note that medical texts of the time were full of contradictions. Some claimed a light supper was essential, while others insisted a full belly was the only way to sleep soundly. Even today, historians argue whether these food cures were grounded in real observation or simply reflections of dietary fashion. And let's not forget cocoa, not the sweet, comforting hot chocolate you're imagining, but bitter, medicinal cocoa, sometimes mixed with spices. Victorians believed it soothed the nerves, though many patients complained it kept them awake instead. Perhaps it wasn't the cure they thought, but by then, who would admit it? So there you are, at the end of a long Victorian evening, sipping milk, nibbling on baked apples, and politely pushing away the bread beer porridge. Does it work? Maybe for some, for you, it's mostly just a reminder that sometimes the strangest cures are really just disguised snacks. And maybe that's the point of nourishment, half lullaby. You crawl back into bed, bay warm, and whisper to yourself, if nothing else, at least I'm full enough to stop worrying for a while. Your stomach is now lined with warm milk and baked apples, but the night still stretches on. That's when a new suggestion floats your way. Try the gadgets. Yes, Victorians adored little mechanical helpers for sleep. Devices that straddled the line between inventive and absurd. One of the most peculiar was the soporific pillow. Imagine laying your head on what looks like a normal cushion, except it's filled with fine horsehair designed to ventilate the skull. The logic, a cooler head supposedly calmed the nerves. Whether it worked or not, you can almost hear the gentle creak of springs beneath your ear, reminding you that sleep might not be the only thing escaping tonight. Then there were weighted blankets, not the cozy ones you might know today, but heavy quilts sometimes stuffed with sandal shop pellets. The pressure was meant to simulate a mother's hand, soothing the restless body into stillness. You tuck yourself beneath one and immediately feel like you're being gently smothered by a bag of flour. Relaxing, perhaps, If you don't mind limited lung capacity, and don't forget the rocking beds, yes, entire contraptions built to mimic a cradle required another person to push the frame, while others were fitted with cranks and springs. Picture yourself, a full-grown adult, gently swaying side to side like a ship at sea. It might work, though you do risk seasickness before slumber. Another curious invention was the sleep helmet, a headgear lined with herbs and fitted snugly to keep your thoughts from wandering. You strap it on, aware that you look more like a Victorian knight than a patient, and wonder how many headaches were caused by the cure itself. Of course, not every gadget was mechanical. Some was simply elaborate furniture. Doctors recommended beds angled at specific inclines, so the head and chest rested higher than the legs. This, they believed, helped circulation and quieted the mind. You stretch out on the slanted mattress and feel less like a sleeper and more like a guest reclining awkwardly at a dentist's chair. Historians still debate whether these contraptions offered any genuine benefit or were simply a reflection of Victorian faith in invention. After all, this was the age of patents, when every odd idea seemed to promise salvation, and yet, in their strange way, some of these prototypes foreshadowed real solutions we still use today: cooling pillows, weighted blankets, ergonomic mattresses. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong, just prematurely enthusiastic. So there you are, swaying in your rocking bed, helmet strapped tight, heavy quilt pressing down, the faint scent of lavender leaking from the stuffing. You look utterly ridiculous, but in the silence of that gadget-filled bedroom, you realize that desperation has always made people inventive, whether it works or not. You close your eyes and think, at least I'm part of history's strangest sleep experiment. You've endured rocking beds and helmets full of herbs, yet the hours still creep along. At this point, a Victorian friend might lean in and whisper, "Count something, anything." Yes, one of the most enduring insomnia cures was mental distraction. The most familiar, of course, is counting sheep, but in Victorian manuals, the flock takes on an oddly specific form. Imagine a meadow. Let one sheep leap a stile, then another and another, until drowsiness takes you. You picture it, a moonlit field, endless woolly bodies hopping in slow motion. By the 10th jump you're strangely invested, steering silently for each clumsy landing. By the 50th, you're wondering if you'll ever get to sleep or if you've just become a part-time shepherd. Sheep weren't the only option. Some guides suggested counting stars through the window, or reciting the alphabet backward, or even listing every king and queen of England in order. The idea was simple, but the brain into submission. You lie there muttering George the First, George the Second, George the Third, until history itself begins to blow into a lullaby. Other recommendations leaned into visualization. One medical writer proposed imagining a slow procession of monks bowing before a candle, one after another, endlessly repeating. Another described picturing a long, gentle stream, floating leaf after leaf upon its surface. You try it, a single yellow leaf drifts past, then another, and maybe If you don't get distracted by how poetic you suddenly feel, the monotony pulls you downward. But the Victorians also believed these exercises had moral value. They weren't just distractions, they were a way to discipline the restless mind. A sleepless night was, in their eyes, partly a failure of self-control. So the cure wasn't simply sheep, it was a test of patience, a nightly exam in virtue. Historians still debate whether these counting practices genuinely induce sleep or merely kept insomniacs occupied until exhaustion set in. Some argue that repetitive mental imagery does help calm neural activity, while others dismiss it as nothing more than wishful thinking. The arguments echo even now whenever someone admits, "I tried counting sheep, but it just made me hungry for lamb chops." So there you are, tucked beneath your heavy quilt, eyes half closed, mumbling a list of Roman emperors in order, or watching imaginary sheep harp until dawn. You might not be asleep yet, but at least your thoughts are no longer racing wildly. And perhaps that gentle boredom, slow unraveling of the day's chatter is the first real step toward rest. You've counted sheep, kings, and drifting leaves, but your eyelids remain annoyingly alert. That's when a Victorian doctor might smile and suggest, you need a tonic. Yes, bottled sleep tonics and elixirs were everywhere, promising rest in liquid form. You hold a small glass vial, the label printed with curly Victorian script, guaranteed to calm the nerves, encourage slumber, and restore the mind. Inside, a serpine mixture that might contain opium, alcohol, valerian root, or all three at once. You take a cautious sip, sweet, bitter, strangely numbing. You wonder, is this medicine or just bedtime brandy in disguise? Some of these potions were quite sophisticated. Valerian, a pungent herb, was one of the era's most trusted sedatives. Chamomile teas and lavender cordials also made frequent appearances, offering softer, floral pathways to slumber. You picture yourself at a polished oak table, candle flickering, gently stirring a cup of chamomile while the house around you settles into silence. But others were less gentle. Laudanum and opium tincture mixed with alcohol was widely prescribed for sleeplessness. You can imagine sipping a few drops and feeling the heavy wave of drowsiness crash almost instantly. Effective? Certainly. Safe? Absolutely not. Historians point out that laudanum dependency was a widespread problem, hidden behind polite language about nervous conditions. Even more curious were the mixtures containing coca leaf extracts or caffeine. Yes, paradoxically, remedies included mild stimulants based on the belief that overly exhausted nerves must be gently awakened before they can rest. You drink, you wait, and suddenly you feel less sleepy, not more. Perhaps the only thing more confusing than insomnia is Victorian logic. What fascinates modern scholars is how normalized these concoctions became. Pharmacies displayed rows of tonics in ornate glass bottles, each claiming to be the key to dreamland. Advertising posters featured serene women reclining in nightgowns, supposedly moments from blissful sleep, and yet behind the elegance lay a cocktail of ingredients that today would require heavy regulation. Even within the era, debate stirred. Some physicians swore by herbal infusions, while others leaned fully into chemical solutions. The medical journals of the time reveal lively arguments was sleeplessness a moral failing, a nervous imbalance, or simply a sign you hadn't found the right tonic yet. Historians today still puzzle over how many people were genuinely helped versus how many simply drifted off under the weight of narcotics. You set the bottle down, lids tingling faintly, and nestle under the quilt. The candlelight lures. For a fleeting moment, you feel the allure of those Victorian elixirs, not so much sleep, but a softened edge, a promise that the night might finally be bearable. You close your eyes and think, if nothing else, at least the bottle looks beautiful on the bedside table. The tonic bottle rests on the nightstand, but still you linger in that twilight zone between awake and asleep, perhaps. A kindly Victorian matron might suggest, the problem isn't inside your body, it's around you. The environment, they believed, shaped sleep as much as the self. So you look around the bedroom. Heavy velvet curtains are drawn across tall windows, shutting out the gaslight glow from the street. A fire crackles low in the grate, the scent of coal mixing with faint lavender sachets tucked in drawers. The bed itself is high, almost throne-like, with carved posts and layers of blankets that would intimidate even the sleepiest traveler. You climb in, nearly vanishing beneath the fabric. Ventilation was a big debate in the Victorian household. Some guides swore that fresh night air was essential. Windows should be cracked open, even in winter. Others warned of night miasmas, invisible dangers drifting in from the streets, insisting windows be sealed tight. You lie there, one hand on the latch, torn between two equally unconvincing theories. Historians still note that doctors of the time argued endlessly about air quality, even as industrial smog choked London skies. Noise was another concern. The lucky could afford country houses, where only the distant lowing of cattle or the chirp of crickets filled the night. City dwellers, however, were kept awake by clattering horse carriages, late-night market sellers, and the occasional drunk singing his way home. Some manuals advised stuffing wax or cotton in the ears, though others said soft sounds like a ticking clock could actually lull the restless mind. You picture yourself listening to that steady tick-tock, imagining it as the world's slowest lullaby. Light, too, was policed carefully as lamps glowed outside, and inside, firelight and candlelight had to be carefully dimmed. Heavy drapes, sleep masks fashioned from scarves, and even elaborate contraptions to shade one's face were recommended. You pull a shawl over your eyes, trying to ignore how it slips crookedly down your nose. And then there were bed companions. In crowded homes, multiple siblings might share one mattress, drifting and turning like restless sardines. Wealthier couples sometimes chose separate beds altogether, arguing that one person's snoring could destroy the other's fragile health. You lie very still, suddenly aware of how much space you do or don't have. Historians today still puzzle over how much of Victorian insomnia was caused not by the mind, but by the sheer weight of the home environment: smoky air, noisy streets, lumpy mattresses, restless families. The cures they prescribed: open a window, close a window, pile on blankets. Remove blankets seem less like science and more like rolling dice. So there you are, nestled in a fortress of bedding, is straining for quiet, face half hidden in fabric, deciding whether to risk a cracked window. And maybe in that suspended moment, you realize the Victorian bedroom was less a sanctuary than a battleground, a place where every choice, from curtains to quilts, became another experiment in the pursuit of rest. The fire has burned low, the curtains are drawn, and still your mind drifts stubbornly awake. At this point, a Victorian advisor might suggest something stranger, not a tonic, not a sheep, but hypnotism. Yes, in parlours across England, men in waistcoats and women in silk gowns gather to watch mesmerists wave their hands and murmur soft instructions. You picture yourself sitting in a high-backed chair, a light flickering on the wall, while a gentleman with an unusually intense stare tells you. Your eyelids grow heavy, very heavy. You fight a giggle, but then again, perhaps you do feel a little drowsy. The Victorians were fascinated by the idea that the mind could be tricked into rest. Hypnotism was promoted not just for entertainment, but as genuine therapy for nervous conditions, insomnia chief among them. Some claimed a trained hypnotist could lull you into deep sleep within minutes, simply by guiding your focus away from restless thoughts. But hypnotism wasn't the only mental cure. Self-suggestion was another. One manual advised repeating the phrase, "I will sleep, I will sleep, I will sleep," over and over until your brain finally gives up. You try it, whispering softly into the pillow. Strangely, the words start to blur together into a hum, and your jaw relaxes. Maybe it's not working, but it's not entirely failing either. Others went even further, recommending what we might now call guided imagery. Picture yourself floating on a calm sea, they said, or walking slowly down a garden path, or climbing a gentle staircase into the clouds. You let yourself imagine it, the sea lapping gently, the garden heavy with roses, the staircase stretching endlessly upward. Somewhere between steps 3 and 4, you start to wonder if the imagery is soothing or just oddly cinematic. Historians still argue whether these practices were precursors to modern cognitive behavioral therapy or merely parlor tricks dressed up as medicine. Some scholars see hypnotism as a sincere attempt at mind-body healing, while others view it as Victorian entertainment masquerading as science. The debate lingers, as hazy as the candle smoke in that imaginary parlor. You lean back, half amused, half intrigued. The hypnotist's voice grows softer. Sleep is coming, gently, steadily. You're not asleep yet, but your thoughts are no longer racing. Maybe that's the real secret. Sometimes the cure isn't about sleep at all, it's about convincing yourself that rest is possible and letting the mind wander toward it like a moth toward a flame. The hypnotist's voice fades, the parlor dissolves, and once again it's just you restless in a Victorian bedroom, staring into the shadows. If the tonics, the bats, the sheep, and the mind tricks have failed, what's left? The Victorians, ever resourceful, turn to gadgets. You run your hand along the edge of the bed frame and discover a curious contraption, a small device meant to regulate sleep. Some were simple weighted blankets or sleeping caps that held warmth around the head. Others were bizarre, like masks with tiny holes meant to regulate airflow, or straps designed to keep you from tossing and turning. You slip on a padded cap, adjusting the ties under your chin, and instantly feel faintly ridiculous. There were also machines. One popular device was essentially a metronome that ticked at a slow, steady pace. You set it on the nightstand, its pendulum swaying back and forth as if time itself were rocking you towards slumber. Another invention resembled a cradle for adults, a gently rocking bed frame meant to mimic the soothing sway of infancy. You lie back, the bed creaking as it tilts ever so slightly, and realize the motion is oddly comforting until it squeaks too loudly, breaking the spell. And then there were the electric sleep aids. Electricity fascinated Victorians, and some inventors believed mild currents applied to the head could calm the nerves. You imagine strapping a crude battery-powered device to your temple, the faint buzz of energy prickling your skin. Is it soothing? A.B. Is it alarming? Absolutely. Historians note that medical journals of the time debated fiercely whether these machines were legitimate treatments or just clever marketing. Not all gadgets were mechanical. Some remedies involved simply rearranging the bed itself, sleeping north to south. One manual insisted align the body with the Earth's magnetic field and encourage deeper rest. Another swore by placing copper coins beneath the pillow to draw away nervous energy. You slip a coin under your head, half expecting to dream of shopkeepers and chimneys. Looking back, historians still aren't sure whether these contraptions did more than provide placebo comfort, but perhaps that's the point. The gentle rocking, the ticking pendulum, the warm weight of a quilt, each one offered a ritual signal to the body that it was safe to surrender. And sometimes ritual matters more than reason. You close your eyes, lulled by the imaginary sway of a mechanical cradle, and let yourself imagine a room full of ticking pendulums, softly humming devices, and bundled sleepers in padded caps. A whole century of people gently tricking themselves toward rest, one gadget at a time. The gadgets tick and hum, but your eyes still flutter open. If machines can't do the trick, perhaps the answer lies in rituals so small, repeated habits Victorians believed could tame even the most stubborn insomnia. You picture yourself preparing for bed with almost ceremonial care. First, the ritual of undressing, layers of garments unbuttoned, folded, and neatly set aside. Each layer removed feels like peeling away the weight of the day, though by the seventh button you're wondering how anyone had patience for this nightly performance. Then comes the donning of a nightshirt, loose and flowing, sometimes paired with a cap to keep drafts away. Already, the body knows it is time to rest. Victorian manuals stress the importance of routine. Always go to bed at the same hour, they said, and rise at the same time. Regardless of how much you slept, the discipline, they believed, would train your nerves into obedience. Imagine yourself glancing at a clock, determined to stick to the schedule even as the minutes crawl past midnight. Bedtime prayers or quiet readings were common as well. Many swore by gentle scripture or poetry, believing that calm words were balm for the nervous system. You open a small book of Tennyson and read a line aloud, your voice soft, the rhyme slow, the rhythm almost hypnotic. Whether or not the words carry spiritual power, they at least give your thoughts a place to rest. There were other quirky rituals too. Some recommended brushing the hair slowly, 100 strokes before bed, to soothe the scalp and spirit. Others advised sipping warm milk mixed with nutmeg or cinnamon, letting the spice settle the stomach and, hopefully, the mind. You take a pretend sip, the warmth lingering in your throat, and wonder if it's the flavor or simply the act of sipping that makes you drowsy. Historians still debate whether these rituals were medical advice or cultural theater acts meant to reassure more than cure, but perhaps reassurance was the real medicine. After all, what is a ritual but a promise to yourself that rest will come? So you imagine the room again, the quiet rustle of fabric, the soft murmur of a prayer, the steady brushing of hair, the faint aroma of warm milk. A household preparing not just for sleep, but for peace. And in that imagined calm, you almost drift off. The rituals have been tried, the gadgets tinkered with, the herbs sipped, and still the night stretches long at last. You discover the Victorians' final defense against sleeplessness, resignation. Yes, when every cure failed, some doctors advised simply accepting wakefulness as a passing condition. The more you struggle, they reasoned, the more alert you become, so you lie back, staring at the ceiling, and tell yourself, very well, I shall not sleep tonight. And that's perfectly fine. Oddly, the very act of surrendering takes the edge off. In Victorian advice manuals, this was framed as a kind of moral strength. If you could lie quietly in bed, calm and uncomplaining, then you were already halfway to rest. One writer even claimed that repose of the body, though without sleep, may refresh the nerves. You picture yourself lying stash still, pretending to be well rested until eventually, without realizing it's true. Sometimes resignation took the form of nighttime activity. Sleepless Victorians might rise to write in journals, tend to small chores, or even walk in the garden beneath the stars. You step into that garden now, the cool air brushing your face, the gravel crunching underfoot, the moon hanging pale above the rooftops. There's a serenity in admitting that night belongs to you, even if sleep does not. Historians still argue whether this acceptance was wisdom or defeat. Was it a clever psychological trick, or simply giving up? The debate lingers, as debates always do, but maybe that's the hidden lesson of Victorian insomnia, that the struggle itself often kept people awake, and that, surrender gentle, unhurried surrender was sometimes the only true cure. So you return to bed, no longer chasing sleep, just letting the night unfold around you, and in that moment, without warning, You realize your eyelids are heavier than they've been all evening. Perhaps this, at last, is the quietest medicine of all. And now, dear listener, you've wandered through the winding, peculiar landscape of Victorian remediations and gadgets, dance and contractions, prayers and resignation, somewhat charming, some absurd, and some perhaps more soothing in ritual than in effect, yet together they form a gentle reminder across centuries, across cultures. People have always sought the same thing you're seeking, nourished. You can imagine the flicker of a candle going out in a long hallway, a heavy curtain drawn, a town falling quiet beneath the stars. Somewhere, in a little house with creaking floorboards, someone in the 19th century turned on their side, pulled up a quilt, and hoped that tonight would be the night sleep came easily. And here you are, more than 100 years later, doing the same. The details may differ, but the wish is timeless. So, let the words slow now. Let your breathing soften. Let your shoulders sink into the mattress. Let the weight of history turn into nothing more than a lullaby in the background. The sheep have harped, the milk has been warmed, the gadgets have ticked, and the garden has been walked. There is nothing left to do. If you're still awake, that's okay. If your thoughts are still drifting, that's okay too. This story doesn't require you to finish it, it's already finished for you. All you need to do now is rest in the quiet, in the safety of the night, and let sleep come if it wants to. So, close your eyes, let the last bits of the day dissolve. Like ink in water, you've traveled far enough, you've heard enough. You've tried enough. Simply rest,